So yeah, as already lined out before, we want to focus here on holistic game development. So there has been a lot of talk about like different ways that also like in traditional consumer-driven startups, how to pretty much like start building great products. And that's what we'll discuss here. And I have the pleasure to have great panelists sitting right next to me. And I'll start with Michael, who actually happens to be in the industry for a long time. Actually, when I read that you're already like 10 years in the industry, I was quite surprised because you kind of look younger. But he actually was one of he started one of the first free-to-play browser games. And they're utilizing the experience they've made in that area now for mobile gaming as well. So there's a lot of exciting stuff to come. Then we have the pleasure to also have a girl here in our group, Alona. She's also in the industry for a long time. So she started in like with an agency, if I may say so. And then seeing like different outlets in the gaming field. She was doing all kinds of operational and BD stuff at Playtika, then at Fantomic, and now she's with Playtech and has a very interesting role in pretty much like selecting different areas of growing the business in either investing in the companies, buying them, or leveraging IP and other interesting things. So pretty interesting perspective from that angle. And last but not least, Anton, who actually also has the privilege to live in the beautiful city of Berlin. And he's a serial entrepreneur. He started companies in all kinds of like different cities across Europe as well as the US. And now he has his own social casino studio, Huge Games, which are growing phenomenally. And yeah, we are happy to further discuss the topic of holistic game development. So I want to start out the whole topic and pretty much like going into like one of the standard approaches of like developing consumer products at the moment anyway, which is kind of like working with the lean processes or the lean startup movement. So, and right away, I'm pretty much like wondering if you consider that like the general approach of starting with kind of like a minimum viable product and getting like first consumer feedback, iterating from there, is actually a viable process for game development in the first place. And I'll just start with you, Michael.
So first of all, yes. It's harder to do it on mobile than on web. But using the right deployment tools, you can iterate on Android and using TestFlight and things like that for iOS. And if you are asking if it's the right way to do, basically, so...
Just like share your perspective.
My perspective is whenever we build a game, we try to get a minimum viable product out as soon as possible and in the hand of our customers as fast as possible. And that means looking ugly, not really working as good, meaning lots of bugs. But you have the basic core mechanic already built inside. And a way to talk with the community as well as measure it, to get both objective and subjective opinions about the game. And from that, once you have that in your hand, it's very easy to start making a call. Do I have something that can grow into something big, into a finished product, or I have to ditch it and try something else?
So from your perspective, a clear yes, it works. It is a process you can follow. Yeah. Perfect. Alona, can you?
I think it depends how you define getting the game out there. Of course, I wouldn't go with the game with just basic core loop to Google and get it featured. But if you look at soft launch as a big focus group, then I think once you have one working core loop and analytics, of course, without that, it's way too early. It's a good way to get a cheap and a wider focus group for your game. So what you can do is just acquire like 1,000, 2,000 users and test the game in certain countries, depending on what you want to test. If you want to test monetization, you'll test it in Australia and Canada. If you want to test game and usability, you can also choose cheaper countries where the CPI is lower and go for Eastern Europe or countries like that. So it's not really getting it out there, but I agree with Michael. When the game works, when you have one complete core loop and you have analytics fully working, there's no reason to wait. There's a sentence that I like that I I think it's the one thing I took from the university. The rest was a waste of time. If you are happy with the product when you released it, you waited too long. So you should be ashamed of your game when it's out. Just try to test it, and once it's ready for global launch, you'll know.
Yeah, I agree with everything both of you said, and yet I think it obviously depends a lot what type of game you are developing on. So if you look at the whole mobile gaming or even whole gaming market, so there are smaller products and there are bigger products. So as in all business, you want to validate your kind of ideas really and concepts really fast. So exactly, don't kind of spend too much time on polishing it and see if the metrics are out there. And I think it's also getting more and more important to test how well you do perform on the distribution side. So not only you are testing how well the inner part of the product works, but how well the distribution part, and try to fine tune both of these as early as possible, because distribution is hard. There's so much competition.
Couldn't agree more. But like you kind of like, especially the strategy you guys are taking is kind of like different to many other gaming companies, right? So pretty much like you have a bunch of different applications that pretty much like support you in pretty much like building a portfolio of games. And is that kind of like something you would consider to be, obviously it needs to be like the right vertical and actually need to make sense, but can you iterate, like how do you iterate to pretty much like in such a setup that you pretty much like have own properties for cross distribution and then pretty much like see that way you can monetize the users the best?
So there are, as with many decisions, pros and cons. So we have a network approach, so we have multiple SKUs on the store, and that helps us to score more organic installs. But it works well for us when we are 80 people. Now, if you are a smaller company, it could be a problem because, of course, that takes manpower to do all the builds and submissions, and then when the ship is bigger, it doesn't turn as fast as if you only have one product. But I think it's a good, at least it's been a great strategy for us now on social casino.
But it means, falling back to kind of like the MVP question, and that's all about the core loop. Is it kind of like anything else you would add to the MVP?
Analytics.
What needs to be there?
If you don't have working analytics on everything that you want to measure, don't waste a cent and a second on releasing the product.
Yeah, you cannot be blind.
Sure.
It doesn't matter. It's like getting a focus group, letting someone play, and then closing your eyes.
Sure. Without knowing what's happening, it's hard to iterate, right? So, but like, are we missing anything else when it comes to like what an MVP for game development actually is? So we have the core loop, we have the analytics. So obviously we also need to start measuring something. So what, like, especially in the early phase of the game, what are like the key metrics you focus on?
So basically, we launched the game without a monetization layer in the MVP because the game is not polished yet. So what we measure is retention and engagement. That's the most important. We see if people come back to the game, and also if they come back to the game, how many times and how often, and for how long they play it. And this way you can know if you have something that people like or not.
Okay, and what's the right timing then to think about like monetization? So let's say, the retention rate is good, so pretty much like at the end of the day, you want to make money as well, right? So that means just like having good retention doesn't necessarily mean that there is like huge potential to make a lot of money as well. So how do you pretty much like build the bridge?
So, like I said, you first have to give a good show before they start giving you coins. So, if you have traction, if you have already users playing, and put in monetization and start working on that as well, using all the analytics tools and know exactly what's working, what's not, and do it in fast iterations while you're still small, because the bigger you grow, like Anton, right? Anton said, it's harder to make changes in the game because the community doesn't like usually changes. And it's good to do all these big changes in monetization, in game mechanics as early as possible on a small team that can give you meaningful information and not do it later. The resentment is huge and people will always complain when you change. You can never do something that everyone says, yeah, it's always someone says, I liked it better before.
If you like the show, then you want to continue to pretty much like see what you like, right? So especially like Playtech has a couple of like different areas you're covering, right? So like from the traditional casino business to social casino to also now casual and mid-core games. So pretty much like how much, since you can cover all those different areas, would you say that there are dramatic differences in how to pretty much like set up the process, do the testing, get like initial traction, or would you say that there are like everything is completely different?
Well, between real casino with real money and social and casual games, there's a huge difference, and the production process is different, and it's actually very different departments within the company with very little communication in regards to process. I personally think that social casino and casual and mid-core games there's more difference between casual games and mid-core games than there is between social casino and casual games. Because if you take, for example, Candy Crush or any match 3 game, it's much more similar to slots game where you can't cash out. Because I put money in, I can't win any money, and I'm playing something that's very simple and fun just to pass the time, and the more soft currency I earn, I can only play more or save time on playing. And our mid-core games require more thinking and strategizing and planning. So social games, casual games are pretty much the same. It's just in the perception of people, slots and poker are seen as gambling, but it's so the gambling is different from the non-gambling, but the casino is not different from the social. Yeah.
So about you now venturing into in mid-core space, if it's like so different, it sounds like a pretty much big risk to mediate as well, right?
It's different in the aspect of which audience you're targeting. So basically, in casual games, you are aiming more for female 35 to 65, and with mid-core games, you're aiming for male 18 to 35. By the way, I'm in the casual audience, but I play mid-core games, so it's not always accurate, but mainly this is the audience. So you target a different audience, which means, first of all, you can't cross-promote between apps. So we can't cross-promote between our Match 3 app and our strategizing war game. So we need to plan this ahead. We're a big company, we can afford to take risks and to try things out, but as a developer, you need to think about what your portfolio looks like and how you can maximize your audience for cross-promotion later on.
So, and when it comes to the KPIs you're measuring, pretty much we would also say retention first, and pretty much like see that the core loop actually works, and then step by step plug in the monetization in?
So some things you can't measure when you're testing a small audience. Like you can't measure your CPI with a small audience, because if I buy users for $50,000 and I pay $1.50 or $2 per user, when I'm going to spend $1.5 million, I'm going to pay $4 per user. So the scaling can change the whole game, which means things like user acquisition and marketing I can't test. I just can't. On small scales, but definitely, like Michael said, retention and how people react to the game. Some other things that we test is, for example, we look at which level or how long after starting playing the game people drop. So sometimes you see that on level 15 you lose 75% of your users, and you go and tweak that level and you improve the game, and then you make it better. Those are the things that are very important to test on small scales.
So when it comes to pretty much like back to the portfolio approach, which is kind of like a very interesting approach as well to pretty much like mediate risks, right? So if you pretty much like see those different titles, how do you ultimately you need to, how do you actually leverage the different learnings across like the different titles and pretty much like see that you can max out on the cross-promotion potential and literally get like as much viral use as possible, because I think that's one of the main advantages of that strategy, right?
So this type of A/B testing becomes, easier. So we can, when we have multiple apps that are, in the same category, we can try different type of economy configs. How much we reward, how that impacts on retention, monetization, and A/B testing. Obviously, if you are doing a lot of changes in the product, it's very hard to pinpoint to one specific change. How much that, how big impact that change had all in overall like retention, and so it's somewhat easier for us to do this type of A/B testing on a network level, and if we see improvement, roll out that to all of the apps, and that's how we do it.
Pretty much like leveraging the network learnings and pretty much like grow everything by it, right?
Yes.
That's great. So when it comes to like, especially in early phase with mid-core games and core games, it's kind of like the community aspects and the fostering the community itself becomes an important aspect, right? So pretty much like having an infrastructure in place that the community can pretty much communicate and also being like play the game together. So since you've been pretty much like having like MMO games for quite some time, would you say that this is something you can test early as well? How the community can pretty much react to the game and how to build up the initial community to really max out the potential later on?
I don't know exactly how do you test the community, but in mid-core, in MMO games, in social games, I mean, the social factor is the defining factor for your success. So having an infrastructure of managing the community and giving customer service, because it's basically software service for the mass audience. So in my company, for example, half the company is user retention and customer support and VIP support, because especially in free-to-play games, you have to take care of your audience, of your VIP members, the people who actually give you most of your money. And having, of course, communication tools, forums, chat rooms, Facebook page, presence where they can communicate with each other and share the gaming experience is a very, very important factor for any MMO. And if it's not happening, you're probably doing something wrong. And if you're not supporting it well enough, you will have resentment, and your community will just, like a flower, it won't bloom, it won't grow, it will just, people come, see it's toxic, we'll go to the next game.
And, do you have like any kind of interesting best practices you can share about like how to treat VIPs?
Not just VIPs, everyone. Of course, VIPs get some kind of extra care, but answering every single player, every single email, every single request, every single complaint, just being out there, customer service, just like any big company, and good response time. Keeping history always helps, and building the tools to track exactly the problem even before he even contacts you is even the most amazing thing that you can do, even compensating him before even complaint. Things like that will just give you a head start compared to most of the other competition you have in the market.
Do you see a big difference there between like your online audience and the mobile audience when transitioning more into mobile?
Wow, it's a difficult question. Of course, I mean, people behave different on web and mobile. In web, of course, I mean, it's much more built, much more mature. You have all the Facebook, of course, forums is much easier to use. On mobile, the communication is more hard, but it's more instant. So using Line, WhatsApp, and everything is a bit different kind of approach. It's more like telegraphic communication, much shorter attention span and shorter texts and everything. On web, usually you can get, on my web games, I can get like a huge page full of comments or suggestions about the game, but on mobile it's harder. So, I mean, it just behaves differently because the medium is different.
So, and like, so far we've been mainly focusing on like, at least like the path when things are heading in the right direction, right? So, but would you, especially at the beginning, now we have like tested the product, the retention might not necessarily be great. So what are like other indicators that it might actually be a good idea to kind of like, to just kill the prototype right away and say, all right, we probably focus our resources on a different project?
What would make you know that you need to kill the product?
Good indicators for it.
I think there are certain KPIs that you can take into consideration. You can look at day 1, day 7, day 30 retention. You look at the ARPDAU if there's in a purchasing. But I think at this stage, unless the KPIs are extremely bad, it's not a good thing to kill the project and kill a product, because sometimes you just test on, I don't know, 1,000 people and you didn't hit the right target audience. So maybe you need to check first who you were targeting. Maybe try another country, maybe try another audience. Maybe you thought that your audience were female 35 to 65, but your audience is actually male 40 to 60 or whatever, and you just need to make some changes in how you reach the people and who you're reaching, and don't kill projects too quickly just because you tried for 2 weeks and the KPIs were bad.
But there is probably the point in time when you need to say, all right, maybe we just, whatever, we copy the game, we might not, like there might already be a lot of games out there, we just won't make it. So, but would you consider, right, now we've tried it, now we need to kill it?
I think when you see that the KPIs are very bad for a period of 2 months or 3 months and nothing picks up, even though you tweak the levels as you see, and you see that it's just not working, and you tried a few audiences, maybe it's a good time to consult someone who has more experience in the industry. If you want, I'm available. If you want to send me games that you want to kill, I'll be happy to kill them for you.
All right, that's
the
good.
Game Slayer.
all the products which don't work, go to Playtech, they help you out.
To be executed.
Exactly. All right, it sounds like that there is a winning formula somewhere out there. You've nailed it. Great. So, like, what would you say, like, especially so you have the advantage that the mechanics are kind of alike, right? So, like, from that angle, you probably already know that the given mechanic works or not. Would you say, have you, like, in the strategy you're taking, also aggressively just like shut down a product because something didn't work so well?
You know, what we also of course monitor is player satisfaction. So, you know, you see the player satisfaction of course from the retention, but we do surveys. We use, for example, third-party solution called Typeform, which is very handy, that you can very seamlessly do slick surveys with your players, and when you do games, you want that the players love your product and they love the experience, and if the love isn't there, you know, maybe it's better to do something else. And but when we do if we do social casino games, which is our primary business, it's you experiment with the different features, you experiment with the content, and of course you need to test new things to drive the company forward. And if the performance isn't there, you know, then it's at least don't start pushing that content or feature for the players. So we are also killing things that aren't working or not moving the needle enough, because usually it's a choice that, you know, you cannot do all these features, and sometimes these different things are bit in conflict with each others, and I think the key to success on free-to-play is that you are fast in iterating. So whole topic of is the process more important than the goal? I think yes, absolutely. So you need to be improving the process and the speed you operate all the time.
But even though it's kind of like I don't know if I'm just hearing it too often, but I hear it pretty often that there are a couple of games that got like a nice feature at a given point in time. So probably like at a point in time when the product was already fairly tested, but still in hindsight people say, oh, it was way too early. It's pretty much like the things were not in place yet, the KPIs, the product itself, there was not enough content. So especially in the context of featurings itself, would you say that that actually has an impact on the strategy and how you pretty much need to build out the product? Or is there a specific thing you should definitely, or you recommend to have in place before you really get like the big push?
You mean featuring by apps?
Apple.
Well, in my category, it's a bit of a problem right now. They don't like my category, but eventually you can never build for a feature. You can never really count on that to happen. So yeah, it's good to do what Apple likes in terms of user experience and UI and everything. It improves your chances, but in the end, you're building a product and do what's right for the product. Of course, doing it in the right way in terms of UI, and Apple, for example, have very good guidelines, is a great advantage to follow them. So, I mean, yeah, try to. I mean, if you're featured, you save so much marketing money. So, yeah, try to do that, but, never be just going blindly towards that. You may miss the creativity part of it, trying to find something new.
What is the aspect of like your specific vertical the platforms don't like so much?
I heard that they want feature equal strategy games for some kind of.
All right, so that's also an interesting rumor.
I have to say I partially agree. I think feature is a game changer for indie developers. It can make or break a company. If you get featured on Apple, by the way, if you got featured and then the game is still not, the KPIs are terrible, that I think you should consider.
It happened to a couple of companies in the space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's great, and I don't think that the Apple feature restrictions are creativity killers. I think on the contrary, they really encourage you to be creative and to think about how to disrupt the usage of the device. Like there's a company in Korea now that's using the camera as part of the controller on the game. And these are the things that Apple encourages. So I think actually going for a feature is great because it can sprite your creativity, and it can really make an indie developer. And Apple, especially in Google, are very into indie developers now. There's actually a category called indie in the featured area. And once you were featured, you're in the circle, and then you may be featured again and again in the future. So you're always in the consciousness. So I think it is good to aim for it. But like Michael said, don't count on it. If you build your strategy on being featured, then that's too big of a risk.
So obviously like a featuring is a beautiful way of getting a lot of viral users. So is there like any other way you pretty much like tested out, seen in the past to really predict virality and pretty much like be in control and building like proper models based on it?
Can you say again?
So on the one side, like different features in order to actually trigger virality, and also based on that predict specific growth.
So I'm still not fully sure where you are driving at, but if you ask about the virality and if there's specific features that drive that, the viral thing is very hard. So the viral installs are very hard to achieve. So even you use Facebook Connect and you incentivize inviting your friends. It's very, very hard, at least on social casino. So we haven't seen any meaningful install amounts yet. We are working hard to get that, but I don't have, unfortunately, any magical tips here that everybody would be doing vast amounts of viral installs. So that's, and that obviously is a, depends bit on the game. So, but in general, I think it's very hard. And what you obviously can do is you can be more smart on ASO. So kind of do search there, research what people are searching and how they discover your app. So the whole discovering apps, there you can improve your chances by playing the ASO game smart.
And this is also like something you actively do, and you've seen success in investing into that area.
We've seen a lot of success with that. So it's when we started doing that, we said that it's a kind of black box that how can we influence on that, but it goes back to operating fast and doing experiments, experimenting how well the icon works, and also your descriptions and event title names. So and as these App Store and Google Play and Amazon, they all work a bit differently. We as a company try to be very distribution centric, and distribution is more important than branding for us. So sometimes companies, you know, they have a strong brand, and it's very important that the title name is the same as brand. I think distribution is even more important, and that's what we optimize very actively on a network basis. And I would recommend all the publishers and developers to do that. So it's hard, but it pays off.
So Oscar has a question there. So
I keep forgetting to say Oscar from Unity, but one of the things you mentioned there was about featuring, and one of the stats I've seen lately is that the effect of Apple featuring is declining over time. And actually that's not a surprise if you think about it, because the effort of making sure that you have an ongoing narrative of your game is making sure that you're constantly telling the game community that the experience is still alive, and that is seeming to have much more effect. So I'm not saying you don't want featuring, you do, but I think we won't run a risk if we tell developers to only go for featuring. And I think actually your own narrative of your brand is more important. That contributes to what Anton's talking about with this idea of distribution as well, looking for other sources, getting stories that other people want to talk about with your game, and then building that into your production pipeline. And I think that to me is to the question. And I'd like to know what you guys say about it, is how much do you use your production, post-release production pipeline to drive your strategy and your engagement with your audience as much as to sustain the numbers in the game? I'd like to know what you think of that.
Well, if to answer also the virality, I mean, you can design the game to have a higher chance of becoming viral. The formula exists, and it's basically that both the user who uses the app as well as the user he's going to invite has to benefit from that action. So as long as you have that built in, you can have magic happening, like you saw with Draw Something, for example, or with the explosive distribution of WhatsApp. So you can try to design to that if you're a good game designer. To answer and continue what our friend here in the crowd started to say, I mean, once you have a community, you have basically a living organism. It has its own life. It grows, and you lose part of the control on the product, because the users eventually, it's the show. I mean, they will ask you to do some things, and you will have to listen to them, because if you don't listen to them, you lose them. And when they start to love you, when you love your show, and we are in show business, then they will even promote you and be your best advocates, and that's where the strength lies, because you can see Twitch, for example, or you can see fan-made art. I mean, in my games I have guys doing storylines, newspapers, comics, like so much creativity, and that's your real engine. Being featured for a while, it's good. Like I said, you can't count on it, Apple guidelines are a great way to learn how to do good UI, but never follow anything blindly, because then you lose any touch with creativity. That's what I say.
I think that maybe it may be in decline, and like you said, it makes sense because the market is also very saturated and the process hasn't changed in a long while. But still, there is nothing else that beats it. So I see things starting now, and some companies with more discovery apps and things like that, and it's very interesting. And some of them are going to be very successful and are probably going to be the next thing. But as for now, featuring is the strongest free distribution that you can get.
From what I've seen, the YouTuber effect is starting to overtake the featuring effect quite significantly. From this data I've seen, anyway.
Yeah, but also getting your YouTube content seen costs money, because making a viral YouTube video is harder than being featured on Apple or Google. So it's free, but it's not really free. It's same for Twitch. So.
But there's more and more IPs being leveraged for gaming as well, right? So this is an area which is kind of might even be the kind of new featuring, to the extent that game developers start actively collaborating with big brands, and it's recent examples really show how, for example, next games with Walking Dead. It's a great example that really the content works in line with the series itself. Do you see that this is kind of here to stay? And if so, what do you see happening in that area?
It's the same as in every market. Eventually, it's too saturated, and people are getting bored with the content. So you need to get famous stuff that they know and brands that they connect with. But it's, from experience, very expensive, and almost no indie developer can afford to get a strong IP. So we're talking about could be millions and half of your revenues. So if you want a very strong IP, you have to have the pockets for it. Even though the big studios realize it as well and invest actively in studios, right? So if the next games with AMC is an interesting example. There are other investments have been made in similar game developing studios. But to pretty much fall back to our question, this totally changes the game, right? So the way how you can actually iterate and how you pretty much need to work with in combination with an IP is a totally different process. But again, it's great, and we're working on it, and I think it's a great thing, and it's big, and it's going to get bigger. I hope, at least we're betting on it. So, but again, yes, of course, if Universal Studios invest in your studio to make a game, that's great. But how many get this? If we're trying to look for something that's more for every indie developer to get themselves exposed, still, it's not. A very, very small few will get IP deals paid for by the studio, and they could by the publisher. For example, if we're a publisher and we want to publish a game, we'll get a strong IP, but then again, we will pay for it. Someone needs to pay for this IP, and we will get most of your revenues for it. So,
which ultimately will increase the importance of publishers as well. Yeah.
What is your strategy for approaching bloggers to blog about the game?
Just establish relationships, show them what you do, and be sincere about it. And if you have something interesting that they would love to tell to the public, then they would just do it. It's all about relationships. You have another person, he's writing, he's also making a living out of it. It's building relationships. That's it.
We have a PR company that does that. But building relationship is good, and sending some personal material could very much help. If you want to get a reporter interested in the company, maybe send a funny, cute picture of the team with the characters of the game or something to catch their eye. I think it could be a good start.
Be authentic and tell a story.
Any other questions?
Why, yes, I do have a question. What about indie competitions? How do you see that in the process of getting attention for your app? Yeah, you're saying, do a Twitter feed to somebody, or hit them on Facebook or something, but what about these competitions that we see?
They get attention from investors, not, I don't think, from users, because users don't attend these conferences. But I would go and I would always check who are the, actually I would check any participant, so I don't think it matters if you win or not, because it's a committee that chooses. But if you participate in something that you may catch the attention of investors.
And thanks a lot to my panelists. Thanks a lot for spending the time here with us.